There is a sentence that appeared in Iranian state media recently that most people will scroll past without understanding its significance. It is not dramatic. It contains no threats of annihilation or declarations of war. But when you understand who said it, where it was published, and what it actually communicates to the people it was intended for, you realize this might be the most important development in the Gulf conflict since the blockade began. The exact words matter. If their land or facilities are used by enemies to attack Iran, they should say goodbye to oil production in the Middle East region. That statement came from the commander of the Revolutionary Guard's Aerospace Force. It was published through state-affiliated media, and it was accompanied by something that transforms rhetoric into operational reality. A list of targets with names and production capacities. If you want analysis that connects the dots between what gets said publicly and what is actually happening behind closed doors in capitals across the region, subscribe now, because what we are about to break down will not be explained this way anywhere else. The coverage is going to focus on ceasefire extensions, canceled diplomatic trips, seized vessels. All of that is real, but there is something happening beneath the surface that matters far more. And it is visible not in what was said, but in what was not said, specifically in who chose to remain silent while Iran named specific oil facilities across the Gulf as potential targets. That silence is not neutral, it is a message. And the governments receiving that message understand exactly what it means. Let us start with what actually got published. The list included coordinates and capacities for facilities across Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain, ExxonMobil and Dow chemical sites in Jubail, the Yanbu complex on the Red Sea coast handling 250,000 barrels daily, the Habshan to Fujairah pipeline specifically built to bypass the Strait of Hormuz, ExxonMobil, Ras Laffan in Qatar processing 146,000 barrels per day, Bapco in Bahrain moving 267,000 barrels daily, Jebel Ali refinery in the Emirates, the Fujairah storage hub, Al Amadi in Kuwait at 346,000 barrels per day, Satorp refinery in Saudi Arabia processing 460,000 barrels daily, and the Manifa plant moving 900,000 barrels per day. These are not abstract industrial sites. These are the facilities that together process millions of barrels of oil every single day. They represent the economic foundation of every Gulf monarchy, and a military commander just published them as a target list through official channels with specific naming and capacity figures. That specificity is not rhetorical flourish. When a military command publishes facility names and daily output numbers, it is communicating that targeting work has been completed. Coordinates exist. Strike packages have been planned. The only remaining variable is the decision to execute. Now, here is the second critical fact. The condition attached to this threat is binary and explicit. If Gulf states allow their territory or facilities to be used by Iran's enemies, their oil production ends. There is no ambiguity in that statement. It does not say maybe, it does not say we will consider options. It says oil production in the region ends, and here is what makes that particularly significant. The condition described has already been met. American forces operate from Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and the Emirates right now. The Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. Air missions into Iranian airspace have been launched from Gulf installations since late February. So the trigger condition the Guard commander described is not hypothetical. It is current reality. What the statement actually communicates is that Iran has chosen not to act on that condition yet, but that restraint is a choice, and choices can change. Now hold that in your mind while considering the third element, timing. This threat was issued after the ceasefire was extended with no defined end date, after two ships were seized by naval forces, after cargo on a seized vessel was publicly described as a gift from China, after Iran fired drones at military vessels in response. This is not the opening move of an escalation sequence. This is the latest step on a ladder that has been climbing since late February, and each rung has gone higher than the one before it. Before we get to what the silence means, there is another layer here that is not getting attention. Russia is doing something different and arguably more sophisticated. Foreign ministers spoke directly. According to the Russian readout, Moscow confirmed unwavering readiness to assist in resolving the crisis. According to the Iranian readout of the same conversation, Tehran confirmed its readiness to guarantee unimpeded passage of Russian vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, regardless of what happens with other traffic. Two countries exchanged specific reciprocal commitments in a single phone call. Russia gets a Hormuz guarantee, Iran gets strategic backing. And this exchange happened on the same day Iran was publicly refusing invitations to talks from Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Read that asymmetry carefully. Iran has not said yes to regional mediators, but Iran has already told Russia what comes through Hormuz no matter what. Russia is not a neutral party. Russia is Iran's patron. And Russia has positioned itself so that whatever outcome emerges from this conflict, deal, or resumed fighting, Russian ships pass through Hormuz and Russian oil revenues continue benefiting from elevated global prices. Russian oil revenues nearly doubled in March, from just under $10 billion in February to over $19 billion in March as global prices surged because of the Hormuz closure. Russia is making $500 million per day from a war it is not fighting. And now Russia has a written guarantee from Iran that its ships transit Hormuz regardless of what happens to anyone else. If the war resumes, Russia's energy windfall continues. If a deal is reached, Russia gets credit for contributing to stability. Either outcome works for Moscow. This is the geopolitical architecture surrounding the Guard's threat to Gulf oil sites. China silent, buying Iranian oil, providing diplomatic cover at the Security Council. Russia vocal in support of Iran, banking windfall revenues, extracting Hormuz guarantees. And the Gulf states are sitting between an American security umbrella that is real but insufficient and a China-Russia-Iran alignment that has no interest in the war ending on American terms quickly. Now let us talk about the Gulf states themselves. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain. These countries are in an impossible position that has become more impossible with every week of this conflict. They host American military installations. They have security guarantees from Washington that form the backbone of their national defense architecture. They depend on American air defense systems, American intelligence, American naval presence to protect their oil infrastructure from exactly the kind of threats that Iran is now making explicit. Pulling away from America is not a realistic option. The relationship is structural, decades deep, tied to military capabilities and economic security simultaneously. But they are also watching Iran threaten their oil production by name, and they are watching the American response to their concerns remain inadequate to the scale of the threat. Reporting indicates that Saudi Arabia is actively pressing Washington to abandon the blockade, not quietly suggesting it, pressing. Because Saudi Arabia has been told privately by Iran that if the blockade continues, no port in the region will be safe. Saudi Arabia received Pakistan's leadership, praised their constructive role, backed the diplomatic process. Why? Because Saudi Arabia needs this war to end before the Guard's target list becomes an operations order. The Emirates arrested nearly 30 people recently, accused of belonging to an Iranian-linked organization. Iran immediately condemned the action. That exchange happened on the same day the Guard named Emirati oil facilities as targets. The Emirates is hosting American forces, arresting Iranian agents and watching Iranian missiles get pointed at its refineries simultaneously. Qatar hosts the largest American airbase in the region. Its Ras Laffan complex handles approximately 10 billion cubic feet of liquefied natural gas daily, roughly 20% of global demand. The Guard named ExxonMobil Ras Laffan specifically in its target list. Qatar, like every other Gulf state, is trying to stay out of a war that is threatening the infrastructure constituting its entire economic existence. Kuwait's Al Ahmadi refinery, 346,000 barrels per day, was named on the list. Kuwait has been pressing for de-escalation since the first week of the war. Bahrain hosts the Fifth Fleet. Bapco, Bahrain's primary refinery, is named on the list. Bahrain cannot remove the fleet even if it wanted to. The fleet's presence is precisely what the Guard is using as justification for targeting Bahrain's oil production.
These countries are not free to choose neutrality. Their bases are already being used. Their territory is already part of the war's infrastructure. The Guard knows this. The threat is designed precisely to make them feel the cost of something they cannot change, and that is where silence becomes the central fact. China is not a passive observer in this conflict. China is the single largest buyer of Iranian crude oil. Tanker tracking data shows nearly 12 million barrels of Iranian crude have moved to China since late February. The Dark Fleet system, tankers with transponders switched off mid-ocean ship-to-ship transfers, payment in yuan through banks outside the international network, has been operating continuously. Iran's oil revenues have been damaged but not severed. The gap between damage and collapse is the gap that China's purchasing system maintains. China also vetoed the Security Council resolution that would have encouraged member states to work toward reopening the strait. Russia vetoed it alongside China. Iran never had to fight that diplomatic battle. It was won before it started. China's foreign ministry called America's blockade of Iranian ports dangerous and irresponsible. China has consistently urged dialogue and called for de-escalation. And China's ambassador in Islamabad expressed full support and appreciation for Pakistan's mediation efforts on the same day that Iranian state media published the Guard's target list of Gulf oil facilities. Full support for the mediator, silence on the threat. That combination is not accidental, it is a position. China supports the diplomatic process because the diplomatic process keeps the ceasefire alive and keeps Chinese ships moving through Hormuz. China says nothing about Iran's threat to Gulf oil infrastructure because saying something would require China to either condemn Iran, which would damage a relationship China has spent a decade building, or endorse the threat, which would create confrontation with Gulf states that host Chinese investments worth hundreds of billions of dollars and provide 30% of China's crude oil imports. So China says nothing, and says it very deliberately. But here is what that silence communicates to the Gulf states. It tells them that when Iran acts on its target list, China will not intervene diplomatically to stop it. China will not call Tehran and say you have gone too far. It will not issue a statement condemning strikes on Gulf oil infrastructure. It will express concern. It will call for de-escalation. And it will keep buying Iranian oil. That is what China's silence means. Not that China supports the Guard's threat, but that China will not pay a cost to stop it. And for the Gulf states, that distinction is the most important diplomatic fact of this conflict. Let me introduce a framework here that explains why this moment is different from previous Guard threats. Every time Iran tests a boundary and the consequences are manageable, Iran's confidence to test the next boundary increases. Every rung on that ladder has been built on the same structural support. China's economic purchases keep Iran viable regardless of American pressure. And China's diplomatic cover at the international level ensures that Iran never faces the kind of unified response that would force genuine recalculation. Look at the sequence. Iran closed Hormuz in February. America could not fully reopen it by force. That is a rung. Iran allowed a ceasefire but kept charging tolls and restricting passage. America accepted that. That is a rung. Iran's Guard overruled its own foreign minister when he opened Hormuz, closing it again within hours. America extended the ceasefire anyway. That is a rung. Iran fired drones at military vessels after the ship seizure. America said there was no damage and kept negotiating. That is a rung. And now Iran's Aerospace Force commander publishes a named target list of Gulf oil sites. The rung above that is acting on it. Each rung has been made possible by the same fact. China's purchases have ensured that the economic cost of climbing has remained below the economic cost of descending. Iran does not climb this ladder out of military confidence. Iran's military has been significantly degraded. It climbs this ladder out of strategic confidence, the confidence that it has a partner whose support makes the cost of escalation survivable. That partner's silence while Iran named 11 Gulf oil facilities as targets is the clearest signal yet of where that confidence comes from. Because the Gulf states are not afraid of Iran because Iran is militarily superior. Iran is not. The United States has been bombing Iran for weeks. Iran's air force, much of its navy, significant parts of its missile infrastructure have been degraded. But Iran does not need air superiority to hit Ras Tanura or Jubail or the Fujairah storage hub. It needs drones. It has thousands of them. It needs cruise missiles. It has those too. And it needs to believe that the consequences of acting are survivable. China's oil purchases give Iran that belief. As long as Iran's revenue stream through China remains intact, Iran can absorb the economic cost of almost any escalation. As long as China keeps buying and keeps saying nothing, Iran has the oxygen to act on its target list if it chooses to. This is the bind that China has put the Gulf states in without firing a single shot and without saying a single word. America is protecting Gulf states militarily. But America cannot protect them from the threat of Iranian strikes on their oil infrastructure without escalating the war to a level that America itself has indicated it does not want. And China, the one country whose economic relationship with Iran could potentially change Tehran's calculus, has chosen silence. The Gulf states understand this. That is why Saudi Arabia is pressing Washington to end the blockade. Saudi Arabia is not pressing because it sympathizes with Iran's position. Saudi Arabia is pressing because Saudi Arabia has done the math. If the blockade continues, Iran acts on its target list. If Iran acts on its target list, Ras Tanura, Saudi Arabia's largest refinery at 550,000 barrels per day, comes under threat. America can try to intercept the drones and missiles. Some will get through, and China will say it is very concerned about the situation and urge all sides to show restraint. The Gulf states are alone in the specific sense that matters most, not militarily alone. America is there, but strategically alone in the sense that the country whose decisions could actually change Iran's cost-benefit calculation is not making those decisions. The real choice facing Gulf states is not binary. Either back America or flip to Iran. Neither is the actual option. The real choice is about the pace and nature of their pressure on Washington. Saudi Arabia pressing the United States to abandon the blockade is not a pro-Iran move. It is a pro-Saudi move. Riyadh is calculating that the blockade, by keeping Iran economically pressured while also giving Iran's hardliners a domestic justification for threatening Gulf infrastructure, is making Saudi Arabia less safe, not more. Saudi Arabia wants the war to end. It wants the Guard's target list to become irrelevant, and it believes the fastest path to that outcome is a deal, not escalation, which means the fastest path is ending the blockade as the price of getting Iran to the table. The Emirates is in a slightly different position. It has been quietly building economic ties with China for years. It hosts infrastructure investments, has significant Chinese capital in its ports, and has been careful not to position itself as explicitly anti-China in the way American foreign policy would ideally want. That positioning is not coincidental. The Emirates has spent years hedging because it watched what happened to countries that did not hedge. And it is that hedging instinct that makes the Emirates particularly sensitive to China's silence. If China will not speak up when Gulf oil sites are named as targets, the Emirates needs to maintain its relationship with Beijing independently of what America tells it to do. Kuwait is similar. Kuwait has historically tried to maintain balanced relationships with both the Gulf's American-aligned powers and Iran. Its geography makes it impossible to ignore Iran. Its oil infrastructure makes it impossible to ignore the Guard's target list. Kuwait's quiet pressing for de-escalation is the only tool it has that costs it nothing. Qatar is the most complicated case. It hosts the largest American airbase in the region. It is hosting active peace mediation efforts. Its Ras Laffan complex is on the Guard's target list. Qatar cannot remove the American base without destroying its security architecture. Qatar cannot ignore the target list, and Qatar cannot confront China, which is a major customer for its gas, about Beijing's silence on the threat. Qatar is watching three simultaneous pressures and trying to use its mediation role as the lever that resolves all three by ending the war before any of them becomes a crisis. That is the strategic landscape China's silence has created. Every Gulf state is under pressure. It cannot fully address unilaterally. Every Gulf state knows that the country whose words to Tehran could actually change the calculus is not speaking. And every Gulf state is making its own quiet calculation about what that silence means for the relationship between American security guarantees and Chinese economic relationships as the fundamental architecture of Gulf stability. And that silence, not Iran's threat, not America's blockade, is the fact reshaping how Gulf states are thinking about the next phase of this conflict. Watch what happens to Saudi Arabia's posture in the coming period. Watch whether Gulf states that have been publicly supportive of the American position start making quieter, more accommodating signals toward Tehran. Watch whether any Gulf state quietly approaches China to ask for diplomatic intercession, guarantees, or a message to Iran that its oil infrastructure is off limits. That conversation, if it happens, will not be announced. It will be visible only in the absence of escalation and in subtle shifts in diplomatic language. But if you want to know why the Gulf is feeling alone right now, you do not need to look at what China said. You need to look at what China did not say. That silence is the answer. And in the Gulf right now, they hear it very clearly.